Poison Ivy still. I often get requests to do videos on specific topics, usually from people in the comments, mostly from people who follow me on Twitter, and sometimes from people in real life who think that this is just an easy thing to do. But as a general rule, myself and pretty much every other YouTuber out there don't generally take requests. It's nothing against you guys, it's a lot harder to do than it might seem. A lot of us already have things scheduled in advance to do. Some videos have to hit certain dates or meet certain releases to tie into either movies or video games and whatnot. And if your request doesn't fall into the parameters of the dreaded YouTube algorithm, there's a very good chance that particular video will never see the light of day. But as it turns out, there really is nothing going on this week that I want to talk about. So for the first time, I'm going to make an exception. A lot of people have been asking me my thoughts and opinions on Justice League Dark Apokolips War, the latest direct-to-video animated movie based on DC Comics from Warner Brothers. There are a lot of these direct-to-video DC animated movies, but I only ever really talked about two in depth, Superman Red Son and Batman Hush. I picked those two because those were actually fairly big deals. They were adaptations of two of the biggest comic books of the last 20 years. But then I started to figure if enough people are asking me specifically about this particular movie, then it must be a big deal in and of itself. So because I am a man of the people, I went out and got myself a copy of it on Blu-ray and decided to finally watch it and tell you guys what I think of it. Seriously hope this was not a waste of my time. I feel as though some background is in order before we move any further. Warner Brothers has been releasing direct-to-video animated movies based on storylines and characters from DC Comics and the DC Universe since 2007. These ran the gamut from original stories featuring DC characters to more direct adaptations of specific comics. Wonder Woman, for example, while influenced by George Perez's 1987 Gods and Mortals story, was more or less its own thing. Justice League: The New Frontier, on the other hand, was more or less a direct adaptation of the Darwyn Cooke classic DC: The New Frontier, even down to the point where they tried to emulate Darwyn Cooke's art style for the animation. In 2013, with the release of the Flashpoint Paradox, the DC animated movies started to form their own little cinematic universe. The style, certain story elements, and even most of the actors would carry over from one film to the next, either directly or indirectly. Sometimes the story elements would be a reference here or there, or sometimes the films would be direct sequels to one another. There were some exceptions. Not every animated movie Warner Brothers released was part of this initiative, but for the most part, this was the norm since 2013. Now I get wanting to have some sort of interconnectivity between your movies. It seems to be the very popular thing to do. But to be fair, some of these movies are actually pretty good. It's just that overall, I've been kinda meh on this era of DC animated films. For one thing, the art style of these films is pretty generic. There's just basic designs that get the point across, but don't really do anything more. It's kind of like if Young Justice lacked any kind of personality. Most of the voice acting has been pretty good. Rosario Dawson as Wonder Woman was inspired casting. Sean Marr as Nightwing was really good in all the movies he was in. The kid who plays Damian was pretty excellent. But then you have characters like Jason Momoa as Batman, who I've always found just flat and boring. Okay, really, it's just him who I have a problem with. But overall, aside from the whole cinematic universe aspect of it, nothing about this recent crop of DC animated movies really does anything to set it apart from the previous generation of DC animated movies that they were doing before 2013. It's pretty much just been business as usual. Some were pretty good, others not so much. At least before 2013, there was more of an emphasis on unique art styles and getting back actors from the animated series or previous adaptations of these characters to reprise their roles and give the voice work a lot more oomph and personality to them. The past few years, they've been using a house roster of actors, and it just hasn't really felt as unique as it had been in the past. Like, you look at Crisis on Two Earths, Justice League Doom, Public Enemies, Superman Batman Apokolips, the Wonder Woman movie I mentioned before, and many others. The list goes on. They all have their own unique art styles and their own unique casts that go a long way in making each film feel unique and different. Whereas now, there's nothing really separating this DC animated cinematic universe from any other box standard, slightly mature cartoon that you would find on TV. Hell, like I said before, it's pretty much just Young Justice, and Young Justice does this consistently better every time. Now on the surface, Justice League Dark Apokolips War really just seems to be another entry in this series. More specifically, however, it does seem to be a direct follow-up to 2017's Justice League Dark film. This was a movie that I never really got into because I'm just not that into Justice League Dark. I've just never really been all that into stories about mysticism and the occult. I mean, there are a few exceptions here and there. That's technically Indiana Jones, but overall, it's just not for me. Just never something I was excited about, I guess. And I think the makers of Justice League Dark kind of assumed everybody was like this, because otherwise, why else would you stick Batman front and center on the box art? But Apokolips War is a little different in that it's actually a loose adaptation of the Darkseid War storyline from the New 52 Justice League series by Geoff Johns and Jason Fabok. Darkseid War was actually the final story of this Justice League series, and kind of acted as sort of the grand finale to the entire New 52 era of DC Comics, right before they ushered in to the Rebirth era that we're currently in now. Darkseid War was also, coincidentally, the last thing Geoff Johns ever did before he turned into a massive disappointment for everybody. Seriously, 3 Jokers better be 5 stars across the board, otherwise I'm gonna be upset. Now, Apokolips War isn't just based on the last New 52 story, it's also acting as the last story of this DC animated cinematic universe, or whatever the hell it's officially known as. Yeah, I didn't even know until doing research for this video. Apokolips War is the final chapter in this cinematic universe. The next movie that's coming out that they're doing, Superman Man of Tomorrow, is a completely different thing. New art style, new cast, new everything. It is fitting though, this whole cinematic universe did start with an adaptation of the first New 52 story, so it only feels right to end it with the last New 52 story. I just hope that, because I haven't been keeping up with these movies on the reg, I won't get too lost or confused. I did read Darkseid War, so I have a good idea of what to expect, and I saw most of these films, so I should have a grasp on who these characters are and what to expect from them. But after I started watching this movie, it became very clear that this was going to be a very, very, very loose adaptation of Darkseid War. Whereas Darkseid War took place in the then present day with the Justice League trying to fend off an invasion from Apokolips, Apokolips War actually takes place 2 years in the future after Darkseid had already won. Earth has completely fallen under Apokoliptan rule. A small group of surviving Leaguers band together to try and undo what he has done, but it's not an easy task. Superman is completely depowered from a kryptonite injection, Raven is suffering from survivor's guilt and struggling to keep her father Trigun suppressed, and John Constantine just doesn't want to be there. Really, the only things this movie has in common with Darkseid War are the fact that Batman sits in the Mobius chair and the general theme of the Justice League versus Darkseid and the Legions of Apokolips. Otherwise, this movie is completely its own thing. And as its own thing, the movie turns out to be fine. It's fine. It's a fine movie. The film suffers from a lot of the same issues as the previous DC animated movies. Stiff animation, inconsistent voice acting, a lot of story crammed into a short 90 minutes. But overall, I did find the movie pretty entertaining. I was invested in the characters and their conflict throughout. I feel like I might be more invested had I seen every single one of these films since the beginning, but I never felt lost or confused just jumping into it. I understood what was going on. I guess the thing for me is I've seen the Justice League fight Darkseid and Apokolips before. A lot of times, in fact. That's the default big storyline that you do when you need to do a big Justice League story. Aside from the comic it's loosely based on, and countless other comics in fact, this same concept was done as the season finale of Justice League Unlimited, and it was done spectacularly in that show. That episode, Destroyer, was itself suitably big and epic and action-packed, filled with many iconic moments that fans still remember fondly today. And it did it all in 22 minutes, whereas Justice League Dark Apokolips War needs 90 minutes to tell its whole story and doesn't really get anywhere close to what Destroyer did. Also, not to mention, this was kind of sort of the premise to the Justice League movie from a few years ago. and we're supposedly getting the real version of that movie next year. I know it may not be fair to compare the big budget Hollywood live action adaptation of Justice League to a direct-to-video animated movie, but these direct-to-video animated movies have shown several times over that sometimes they're just as good, if not better, than what Hollywood is offering. To be fair though, this movie does try to differentiate itself from the rest by focusing on characters that you don't normally see in this type of story. The main characters of this film are John Constantine, Damian Wayne, Raven, and a depowered Superman. And those four characters offer a unique and fresh perspective on this particular plot. These are characters that have been built up over the course of this entire series, and they get satisfying payoffs here. Raven and Damian pretty much have the emotional core of the story and offer a satisfying conclusion to the threads that they've been building to. On the other hand though, Constantine is painted as the primary protagonist of the movie, but he doesn't necessarily have an arc to speak of other than he eventually learns to play well with others. He does steal every scene he's in, and Matt Ryan's performance is spectacular, but often it feels like a distraction rather than an important part of the story. Both Raven and Constantine add elements of magic and mysticism to this story, and those are elements you don't normally see in a story like this. Normally, Darkseid goes up against Justice League members who are a more pure brute strength, you know, fist fights and whatnot. But here, the magic elements do add a nice variety to the proceedings. Sure, yes, ultimately, it does wind up being a fist fight between Superman and Darkseid, but the magic elements are a nice touch, and they do play into the final climax of the movie. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but it's a good twist in my opinion. There were a lot of elements of this movie I did enjoy thoroughly. I thought they did a very good job at presenting a world where Darkseid has taken over completely, showing us that our heroes are down and out but still trying to fight. I actually think the look of Superman with his kryptonite veins and the green S on his chest is instantly iconic and something that should carry over into the comics eventually. I do get why people wanted me to watch this movie, and I don't regret watching it at all. I just don't feel like it's especially necessary to go run out and watch it right now. If you can wait for it to appear on DC Universe, if that service is even still around by that point, watch it then. Or if you can wait a year or so, then just wait for the Snyder Cut of Justice League, because that is supposed to be much, much better. So I've been told. But what did you think about Justice League Dark Apokolips War? Did you see it? Did you enjoy it? Are you gonna see it now that I've talked about it here? Are you sad to see this series end? Or do you think there's a better version of this story out there already? Let me know down below or anywhere on the internet. I know it's kind of disappointing to go to a YouTube video of a movie review or whatnot and just see the YouTubers say it's fine. I know you want to hear them say it's the best thing ever or it's a complete piece of shit. But I mean, yeah, the movie's just fine. It's not my fault, it's the filmmaker's fault. I'll have Amazon affiliate links in the description below to Justice League Dark Apokolips War on Blu-ray so you can buy it and watch it yourself, as well as some other movies and comics that featured the Justice League versus Apokolips and Darkseid. There's a version of that story for you somewhere, just gotta find it. And of course, don't forget that we have new videos on this channel every single Tuesday and Wednesday, with Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern being Wulff Den Live. So subscribe to see all of that. Like this video and share with a friend who needs something of an appetizer to get them ready for the Snyder Cut next year. This I feel would be a good appetizer for that. If you want superheroes, a lot of blood and F words, this is the movie for you. And if not, check out that episode of Justice League Unlimited I mentioned before, or read the Darkseid War comic, or play Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. It's actually got the same storyline in a way. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time.